The cold of the throne room seeped through the thin soles of my worn leather slippers, a chill that had nothing to do with the stone and everything to do with the 100 pairs of eyes fixed upon me. They were a predator pack, and I, the foolish rabbit who had willingly stepped into their den. Laughter, thin and sharp as shattered glass, still echoed in the high, vaulted ceilings. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the vast, intimidating silence that followed. Before me, on the obsidian throne, sat the reason for my terror and my impossible hope, Alpha King Foreign Dramos. He was more myth than man, carved from the very granite of the mountains that encircled his kingdom. His black hair fell over a brow, etched with constant pain, and his eyes, the color of a stormy sea, held a weariness that went bone deep. But it was the curse that held everyone's attention. It snaked up his right arm from a wound that would not heal, a lattice of blackened veins that pulsed with a malevolent, faint violet light. The scent of it filled the air, a cloying mix of decay and dark magic that made my stomach clench. It was the scent of a slow, inevitable death. And Omega, Lord Valerius, the king's first advisor, had sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. You would have us believe that a forgotten girl, with no lineage and no training, can succeed where the most powerful healers in the realm have failed. My gaze remained fixed on the king. I had seen this in my visions. The cold mockery, the weight of their disbelief. I had felt it in my bones. But I had also felt him. His pain. His wolf's silent scream for release. Foreign leaned forward, the movement a study in contained agony. A faint smile, devoid of all warmth, touched his lips. Tell me, Omega, Isandra, what magic do you possess? What secret herbs or forbidden incantations do you offer? His voice was a low rumble, like rocks grinding together deep within the earth. It was a voice accustomed to command, now laced with the bitter iron of his suffering. I swallowed, my throat dry as dust. No magic, Your Majesty, no incantations. My own voice was a whisper, easily lost in the cavernous space. But he heard it. His eyes narrowed, the silver in them glinting. Then what? He pressed, a flicker of raw impatience breaking through his control. Hope? A prayer to a silent moon? A touch, I said, the word barely audible. I believe I only need to touch the wound. A fresh wave of derisive murmurs swept through the court. Valerius threw his hands up in theatrical disbelief, but the king did not laugh this time. He stared at me, his gaze so intense it felt as if he were peeling back the layers of my soul, searching for the lie. He saw only terror and a strange, unshakable certainty. I knew it was madness. I was an Omega. Our purpose was to soothe, to nurture, to be the quiet heart of the pack, not to challenge ancient curses. But this feeling, this pull toward his pain, was the most real thing I had ever known. Slowly, deliberately, he extended his cursed arm. The black veins seemed to writhe in the torchlight. Then prove it, he commanded, his voice a blade's edge. Touch me. Show this court the extent of your foolishness. This was the moment, the precipice. Taking a breath that did little to calm the storm in my chest, I walked forward. The scent of him grew stronger, pine and cold mountain air, smoke from a dying fire, and underneath it all, the raw metallic tang of his wolf. It was a scent of power and loneliness. Each step was a lifetime. The lords and ladies of the court held their breath, their scornful eyes promising a swift and brutal punishment for my failure. I knelt before the throne, my worn gray dress pooling on the polished floor. My hand, trembling, rose. It hovered for a second over the corrupted flesh of his forearm. The heat coming off the wound was unendurable, a feverish, dark energy that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I could feel the curse tasting the air, sensing me. It was ancient, hungry, and intelligent. Then my fingers made contact. Fire. Not of heat, but of pure, unbridled energy shot up my arm. A gasp was torn from my throat, and from his. The world dissolved into a maelstrom of sensation. I felt the curse, a living entity of spite and shadow, recoil as if struck. It hissed in my mind, a serpent of pure hatred. Simultaneously, I felt him. His wolf, a great, magnificent beast chained by agony, surged toward me not with aggression, but with desperate, soul-shattering recognition. Mate. The word was not spoken. It was a primal crash of thunder in the deepest parts of my being, a truth that struck with the force of a physical blow. Under my palm, the angry red flesh around the wound cooled. The throbbing black veins receded, just a fraction, but it was enough. Foran's entire body went rigid. His breath hitched, his knuckles white where he gripped the throne. His stormy eyes widened, the silver in them now swirling with molten gold, the color of his wolf breaking through the haze of pain. The connection between us was a living thing, a blazing arc of power that lit up the space between our bodies. In that instant, I saw flashes of his life, a battlefield under a broken moon, the sting of betrayal from a trusted friend, long years of solitary pain, a king's heart encased in ice. And he, I knew, felt mine. A lifetime of being overlooked, the quiet ache of loneliness, and the strange, inexplicable certainty that I was born to stand here, in this moment, with my hand on his skin. I pulled back as if burned, falling onto the floor, my chest heaving. The throne room was utterly silent. The mockery was gone, replaced by stunned, fearful disbelief. Lord Valerius was the first to find his voice, his tone laced with a new kind of venom, fear. "Witchcraft! She is a sorceress! Seize her!" But the king rose. He moved with a speed that belied his injury, a predator uncoiling. In 2 strides, he stood over me, his shadow falling across my body. He looked down not at me, but at his arm. The spot where I had touched him was visibly calmer, the flesh less inflamed. The oppressive aura of death in the room had lessened, replaced by the crackling ozone of raw power. He lowered his gaze to me, and the cold amusement was gone. In its place was a maelstrom of shock, suspicion, and a terrifying, possessive hunger that had nothing to do with healing. His wolf was at the surface, staring at me through his eyes, recognizing a part of its own soul standing before it. He knew. He had felt it too. Without a word, he turned to his royal guard. "Take her to the North Tower. Post a guard. No one is to see her. No one." His voice was iron, an order that would not be questioned. He did not look at me again as they pulled me to my feet. The court parted before us, their faces a mixture of awe and terror. As they led me from the great hall, I risked one last glance back. Foran was staring at his hand, the one I had not touched, and flexing his fingers as if feeling them for the first time in years. His destiny had been death, and in one touch, I had thrown it into chaos. The North Tower was a gilded cage. The chambers were luxurious, fit for a visiting noblewoman, with a canopied bed, a hearth that crackled with a warm fire, and a window overlooking the moonlit expanse of the kingdom. But the door was thick oak, barred from the outside, and the guard's footsteps were a constant, heavy reminder of my status as a prisoner. I spent hours pacing the plush carpets, my mind reeling. Mate. The word echoed, a ghost in my heart. It couldn't be. The moon goddess chose mates. She bound souls of equal standing, alphas to lunas, betas to their chosen. She did not bind the Alpha King, the most powerful wolf on the continent, to a nameless, packless Omega. It was a mistake, a cruel trick of the curse's magic. And yet, I could still feel the phantom warmth of his skin against mine. I could still feel the desperate call of his wolf, a lonely howl that resonated in my own blood. I had never felt my own wolf so keenly. She was a small, timid thing, long dormant under years of Omega submission. But tonight, she was awake, restless, peering out through my eyes and searching for the golden gaze of her alpha. A sharp knock on the door made me jump. The bar was lifted, and the door creaked open. It was not a guard. It was him. King Foran stood in the doorway, filling it completely. He had shed his formal robes and crown, dressed now in a simple black tunic and trousers that did nothing to hide the formidable power in his frame. The torches in the hall cast his face in harsh shadows, making him seem even more dangerous, more primal. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him with a quiet, definitive click. The room, which had seemed spacious moments before, suddenly felt suffocatingly small. His presence consumed all the air. The scent of him, that intoxicating mix of pine, winter, and wolf, was a physical force, wrapping around me, pulling me in. "Who sent you?" he asked, his voice low and devoid of courtesy. "No one," I whispered, backing away until my legs had hit the stone bench by the window. "Don't lie to me," he growled, stalking toward me. The golden flecks in his eyes were more prominent now, glowing with an inner light. Healers do not work by touch alone. Curses like this are not soothed by an Omega's prayer. You carry a power you should not have. Was it Valerius, a trick to gain more influence? Or one of my enemies from the southern packs, a Trojan horse sent to finish what their assassins started? "It's not a trick," I insisted, my voice shaking but firm. "I don't know how I can do it. I only know that I can. I've dreamt of your wound. I felt your pain across the miles." He stopped, barely an arm's length away. The heat from his body reached me, a stark contrast to the cold dread pooling in my stomach. "You felt my pain?" he repeated, a note of dark disbelief in his voice. I nodded, unable to speak. His gaze was too intense, stripping away all my defenses. He was a king interrogating a traitor, not an alpha before his mate. He was fighting it. "Show me again," he commanded, his voice dropping to a husky murmur that vibrated through my bones. He held out his cursed arm. In the softer light of the fire, the black veins seemed darker, the skin around them pale and tight. My hand trembled as I reached for him. This time I was prepared. The moment my fingers brushed his skin, the connection slammed into place. The fire, the energy, the feeling of two sundered souls crashing back together. I gasped, and I saw his own jaw clench, a muscle feathering along his cheek. I focused past the blinding sensation, pushing a thread of my own energy, a calm silver light that I had never known I possessed, into the wound. The curse recoiled again, a faint, shadowy mist lifting from the veins. A shudder racked Forin's powerful frame, and a low groan escaped his lips. It was not a sound of pain, but of a relief so profound it bordered on agony. I could feel his wolf, clawing at his control, desperate to claim me, to pull me against him and hold me until the world ended. And my own timid wolf answered, whining softly in my mind, yearning to soothe him, to offer him comfort. He snatched his arm back, breaking the contact. The sudden loss was a physical ache. We stood there, breathing heavily in the silence, the air between us thick with unspoken words and a primal energy that was spiraling out of control. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice ragged. He wasn't asking about my power anymore. He was asking about the bond, the undeniable, terrifying bond that hummed between us like a plucked string. I don't know," I lied. His eyes narrowed, pinning me in place. "You felt it, in the throne room. I saw it in your eyes." He took the final step that separated us, his large hands coming up to grip my shoulders. His touch was firm, possessive, sending another jolt through my system. He was so close I could see the lines of exhaustion and pain around his eyes, the faint silver scars that marked his skin. He was magnificent and broken all at once. "Tell me the word you heard in your soul, Lysandra," he commanded, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "Say it." Tears pricked my eyes, from fear, from the overwhelming intensity of the bond, from the sheer hopelessness of it all. He was a king, I was nothing. This bond would destroy us both. "No," I whispered. A feral light blazed in his eyes. His wolf was done with patience. His head dipped low, his nose brushing against the sensitive skin of my neck. I froze, my breath catching in my throat as he inhaled my scent. A possessive rumble started deep in his chest, a sound that shook the very foundation of my being. It was the sound of acclaim. "You will heal me," he breathed against my skin, his voice thick with a darkness that was both a promise and a threat. He wasn't asking. He was telling me my new purpose. His hand moved from my shoulder, his fingers tracing the path of the curse on his own arm, then moving to press against my chest, right over my frantically beating heart. He was marking the connection, binding my life force to his wound. "Whether by magic or by fate," he growled, his golden eyes burning into mine. "Your life is now forfeit to mine. You will not leave my side. You will not speak to anyone without my leave. You will fix what has been broken." He leaned in closer, his lips brushing the shell of my ear, and his final words sealed my fate. "You belong to me now, healer." His words hung in the air between us, heavy and final as a cell door slamming shut. "You belong to me now." It was not the declaration of a mate finding his other half, but the cold pronouncement of a king claiming a new asset. My wolf, the timid, gentle creature I had known my whole life, whimpered in my chest, torn between the instinct to submit to his raw alpha power and the sting of being reduced to a tool. He was accepting the utility of my gift, but rejecting the soul it was attached to. He finally released me, stepping back. The absence of his heat was a sudden, aching cold. He watched me, his golden eyes narrowed, assessing my reaction. He expected fear, and I gave him that. My hands were trembling, my heart a wild bird trapped in my ribs. But underneath the terror, something else was kindling. A tiny, unfamiliar spark of defiance. He might be a king, but the power that had soothed his curse was mine. That gave me a worth I had never before possessed. "I am not a thing to be owned, Your Majesty," I said, my voice barely a whisper, yet it cut through the tense silence. A flicker of surprise crossed his face, followed by a dark, dangerous amusement. "No, you walked into my court and placed your hands on the king. You bound yourself to my fate. In our world, Isandra, actions have consequences. Your consequence is me." He gestured to the opulent room. "You will have every comfort. The finest foods, the softest silks. You will want for nothing, but you will not be free. Not until this poison is gone from my veins." His gaze dropped to his arm, where the dark markings pulsed faintly under his skin. A constant, hated reminder of his mortality. The agony was a permanent resident in his eyes, and seeing it so close, I felt an unwilling pang of sympathy that warred with my indignation. He was a prisoner too, chained to his own body. "You will be moved to the chambers adjoining my own," he continued, his tone leaving no room for argument. "The royal healer, old master alien, will attend you to ensure your strength is maintained, but you will speak to no one else of what passes between us. Your life as an Omega is over. Your new life begins and ends with this task." Before I could protest, he turned and strode to the door. He paused with his hand on the latch, his broad back to me. "My guards will escort you. Do not try to run. There is no corner of this kingdom where my scent would not find you." And then he was gone, leaving me alone with the crackling fire and the suffocating scent of pine and power that lingered in his wake. My legs finally gave out, and I sank onto the floor, pulling my knees to my chest. He had found me, seen me, and claimed me, all in the space of a few hours. But he saw me as a key to his survival, not as the other half of his soul. The moon goddess had a cruel sense of humor, binding an Omega to a king who valued power above all else, a king who refused to see the bond for what it was. Tears of frustration and fear slipped down my cheeks, hot against the cold reality of my new cage. The move was swift and silent, conducted in the dead of night under the watchful eyes of the king's personal guard, the Crimson Guard, so named for the deep red of their cloaks. They were specters of loyalty, their faces hidden in the shadows of their cowls, their movements utterly silent. They led me through deserted corridors, their presence a clear warning to any who might see us. The Alpha King was taking a personal interest in the Omega Girl. Whispers would follow in our wake like ghosts. The royal wing of the castle was a world away from the simple communal halls I was used to. Here, the stone floors were covered in thick rugs from the sun-scorched south. Tapestries depicting ancient battles covered the walls, and the air itself felt heavier, charged with centuries of power and secrets. My new chambers were even more luxurious than the tower room. A fireplace large enough to stand and dominated one wall, and a balcony offered a breathtaking, terrifying view of the sheer drop to the valley below. But the most significant feature was a heavy, ornately carved door that, I knew with a sinking heart, connected directly to the king's own bedroom. I had barely taken in my new surroundings when an old man with kind, weary eyes and hands stained with herbs entered. This was Master Elian, the royal healer. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of respect that startled me. "The king has commanded me to see to your health," he said, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. He looked me over, his gaze professional but not unkind. "The energy you use, it is not a common healing art. It is life force. You are giving a piece of yourself to fight the darkness in him. It will take a toll." He placed a tray on the table, filled with vials of tonics, dried fruits, and a small loaf of nutrient-rich seed bread. "You must eat. You must rest. What you are doing is like trying to fill a leaking barrel with a thimble. You will exhaust yourself if you are not careful." "The curse," I began, my voice hoarse. "What is it?" Elian's face grew grim. He glanced at the closed door to Forin's chambers, as if the curse itself might be listening. "An old magic, a blood curse, laid during the Battle of the Blackwater Pass. It was cast by the shadow sorcerer, Kalin, just before the king struck him down. It feeds on life, on strength, on the alpha essence itself. It was designed to rot him from the inside out, to turn his own power against him." He sighed, a heavy, tired sound. "We have tried everything. Nothing has ever made it retreat. Until you." He looked at me then, a profound curiosity in his eyes. "You are an anomaly, child. A miracle or a new kind of poison, I cannot yet tell." His words sent a shiver down my spine. After he left, I forced myself to eat, the food tasting like ash in my mouth. My every sense was attuned to the door, waiting for the summons I knew would come. It came just after the moon had reached its zenith. A single sharp knock. The sound echoed the frantic beat of my own heart. Taking a shaky breath, I opened it. Forin stood there, stripped to the waist. My breath caught. If he was a fearsome sight in his royal attire, he was a primal force of nature like this. His chest and shoulders were a landscape of muscle and old scars, each a story of a battle won. Moonlight from his balcony window spilled over his skin, silvering the lines of his body. But my eyes were drawn to the curse. Without the fabric to hide it, I could see its full extent. The black veins snaked from the unhealed wound on his forearm, up over his bicep and shoulder, creeping like poisoned ivy toward his heart. It pulsed with a sickening violet light. A living thing latched onto him. His face was a mask of strained control, his jaw tight. The pain must have been worse at night. "It is time," he said, his voice a low growl. He led me not to a chair, but to the center of his vast chamber, where a bearskin rug was spread before a dying fire. He sat on the floor, legs crossed, the posture of a warrior in meditation, and held out his arm. It was an offering and a command. My heart hammered as I knelt before him, the fur of the rug soft beneath my knees. The air was thick with his scent, undiluted and overwhelming. I could feel the heat of his skin, the thrum of his power, and the Eitzschatl of the curse. This time, I knew what to expect. I placed both my hands on his arm, one just below the wound, one above. The connection slammed into me, a physical blow. The curse shrieked in my mind, a wave of pure malevolence and agony. It showed me images, fire, screaming, the stench of blood and scorched earth. I saw a man with eyes like chips of obsidian, his face contorted in a triumphant sneer, as he whispered the final words of the spell, his own blood anointing Forin's wound. "Kaelin, mine," the curse hissed, not in words, but in pure possessive intent. "This vessel is mine. The Alpha belongs to the shadows." I gritted my teeth, ignoring the foul presence. I closed my eyes and reached deeper, searching for the king's spirit. For his wolf, I found it. A magnificent silver beast pacing behind a wall of impenetrable pain. I pushed my own energy, that quiet silver light, toward it. Not as a weapon, but as an offering of solace, a whisper of peace in his endless storm. "You are not alone." The curse fought back. It was like wrestling with a serpent made of smoke and ice. It tried to push into me, to find purchase in my own soul. I felt its cold touch slide over my defenses, seeking a crack, a weakness. My head began to pound. A wave of nausea washed over me. Sweat beaded on my forehead. This was so much harder than the first time. The curse was aware of me now. It saw me as a threat. But I could feel Forin's wolf responding. It stilled its frantic pacing and turned its great golden eyes toward my light. A sense of profound, weary gratitude flowed from it, giving me strength. I pushed harder, focusing all my will, all my life force, into a single point of light under my palms. The black veins on his arm recoiled. The angry flesh around the wound began to calm, the edges seeming to knit together by the smallest of margins. A deep, shuddering groan was torn from Forin's chest. His control broke. His head fell back, and for a moment, the mask of the stoic king was gone, replaced by the raw vulnerability of a man experiencing his first moment of true relief in years. The effort was immense. My vision started to blur at the edges. My arms trembled with exhaustion. Master Elian was right. It was draining me, taking something vital with it. I held on for as long as I could, until black spots danced in my eyes and the room began to spin. Finally, my strength gave out. My hand slipped from his arm, and I swayed, a gasp of exhaustion escaping my lips. Strong arms caught me before I could fall. Forin pulled me against his chest, his uninjured arm wrapping around my waist to steady me. My head lolled against his bare shoulder. My cheek was pressed against his skin, warm and solid. I could feel the steady, powerful beat of his heart under my ear. For a dizzying second, there was no king, no Omega, no curse. Just the two of us, wrapped in the quiet of the night, the bond between us humming a song of rightness, of coming home. He held me for a long moment, his breathing deep and ragged. I felt the rumble in his chest before I heard the words, a husky murmur against my hair. "Thank you." The two simple words were more shocking than his earlier commands. They were soft, filled with a gratitude so profound it felt like an intimate confession. My exhausted mind clung to the sound of it, to the feel of his arms around me. This was the mate I sensed, the man behind the crown. Then, as if realizing what he'd done, he stiffened. The moment was shattered. He gently but firmly set me away from him, his kingly mask sliding back into place. The vulnerability was gone, replaced by that familiar, guarded intensity. "Go," he said, his voice rough. "Rest. We will do this again tomorrow." I stumbled back to my room on shaky legs, my body aching and drained. But my heart was a confusing mix of terror and a fragile, budding hope. He had thanked me. He had held me. Perhaps there was a man under all that kingly ice, after all. As I collapsed onto my bed, a sharp, cold sting on the back of my hand made me cry out. I looked down, my blood running cold. For a fleeting, horrifying second, I saw it. A tiny, thread-like black line had appeared on my own skin, a miniature echo of the veins that marked him. It pulsed once with a faint violet light, a whisper of the curse's malice. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it vanished, leaving my skin unblemished. My breath hitched in my throat. It wasn't just my energy I was feeding into the void. The curse, the shadow in his wound, was taking something else. It was leaving its mark on me. Master Elian's words came back to me, laced with a new and terrifying meaning. A miracle or a new kind of poison. In healing him, I was letting the darkness inside myself. Sleep offered no escape. My dreams were a haunted landscape of writhing black veins and the chilling whisper of a name, Kaelin. I woke with a gasp, the phantom cold of the curse still clinging to me like a shroud. My first frantic action was to look at my hand. In the pale dawn light filtering through the balcony doors, my skin was clear, unmarred. But I knew what I had seen. It was not a hallucination born of exhaustion. The curse had touched me, tasted me, and left a fleeting, venomous signature. I was living on a knife's edge, my days a blur of silent, lonely luxury, and my nights a terrifying battle against a shadow that was slowly learning my name. Each morning, Master Elian would visit, his kind eyes searching my face for the toll the healing was taking. He brought strengthening tonics that tasted of iron and earth, and we would speak in low, careful tones. "It is as I feared," he murmured one morning, several days into my new routine. He examined my hands, though there was nothing to see. "This is no mere transfer of energy. It is a siphon. The curse is a parasite. It has fed on the king for years. Now it has a new source of nourishment to sample." "It's taking parts of me," I whispered, the admission terrifying. "When I heal him, I feel a piece of my own spirit." "Fraying." Elian nodded grimly, his expression pained. He placed a small, smooth river stone, etched with a faint silver rune, into my palm. "Keep this on your person. It is a ward of minor protection. It will not stop the curse, but it may help shield your core essence from the worst of its hunger." The stone was cool against my skin, a small, solid comfort in a world that had become dangerously ethereal. The days bled into one another. I was a ghost in the royal wing, waited on by silent servants who kept their eyes downcast, their faces carefully blank. They knew who I was, the Omega who had bewitched the king. I could feel their fear and suspicion radiating from them like heat from a forge. I asked Elian for books, desperate to understand the enemy I fought every night. He brought me ancient leather-bound tomes from the royal library, their pages smelling of dust and forgotten knowledge. I pored over texts on blood magic, shadow curses, and the history of the fallen sorcerers. I found Kaelin's name. He was a master of parasitic hexes, magic that entwined a caster's dying breath with the life force of his killer, creating a bond that could only be broken by the victim's death. The books offered no hope, no mention of a cure. They spoke only of containment, of slowing the inevitable decay. None of them mentioned a power like mine. I was a chapter that had never been written. My wolf, once so timid, was a constant, restless presence now. She cared little for my fear or the curse's touch. She paced the confines of my mind, her gaze fixed entirely on the alpha in the next room. She felt his proximity, his pain, his power. She yearned for him with a primal, aching need that was a constant war with my own terror. She did not see a king or a master. She saw her mate, and her every instinct screamed to go to him, to soothe him, to offer not just her healing touch, but her complete submission. The tension of this internal battle was exhausting. One afternoon, Elian insisted I walk in the physician's garden, a small walled sanctuary, reserved for the healers. "You need the sun, child," he'd said gently. "A plant cannot thrive without light, and neither can you." The garden was beautiful, a riot of green and fragrant blossoms, but I couldn't relax. The open sky felt too exposing after the confines of my rooms. I was trailing my fingers through a patch of silver leaf when a voice, smooth and cold as polished steel, cut through the air. "It is a risk, allowing a creature like you to wander so freely." I spun around. Lord Valerius stood at the entrance to the garden, flanked by two of his personal guards. His robes were immaculate, his silver hair perfectly coiffed. Only his eyes, hard and dark as obsidian chips, betrayed the ugliness of his intentions. "Lord Valerius," I said, my voice tight. Elian moved to stand slightly in front of me, a frail but determined shield. "Master Elian," Valerius said, his tone dismissive. "Leave us. My business is with the Omega." "She is under my care and the king's direct protection," Elian stated, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. Valerius laughed, a short, unpleasant sound. "The king is not himself. He is enchanted. In his desperation, he has allowed a viper into his own nest." He took a step forward, his gaze locking onto mine. It was filled with a venom that felt almost as malevolent as the curse itself. "Tell me, little witch, what is your game? Do you drain his life even as you pretend to save him? Is your touch a slower, sweeter poison than Kalen's?" "I am trying to help him," I retorted, my hands clenching into fists at my sides. "Help him?" Valerius sneered, advancing until he was only a few feet away. "An Omega has no power, no strength. Whatever you are doing is an abomination, a perversion of the natural order. You are either a fraud or something far, far worse, and I will expose you." He lowered his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "He will tire of you. The court is already whispering. Once your novelty fades, he will cast you aside. And when he does, I will be waiting." The threat was naked, unmistakable. A cold dread washed over me. He was right. Foreign was using me. What would happen when I was no longer useful? Or worse, when the curse had taken so much of me that I was a hollowed-out shell? "You will leave her be, Valerius." The voice was a low growl that seemed to make the very air vibrate. Foreign stood at the garden gate. He must have come from the training grounds. He wore no tunic, only leather trousers, and his chest and arms were slick with a sheen of sweat. He wasn't leaning on his authority as king. He was radiating the raw, untamed power of a dominant alpha. The scent of him, pee, sweat, and pure fury flooded the small garden. Valerius's guards instinctively took a step back, their heads bowed in submission. Foreign's eyes, blazing with gold, were fixed on Valerius. He stalked forward, his movements fluid and predatory. He didn't stop until he was directly in front of his advisor, dwarfing him. "I gave an order," he snarled, his voice dangerously quiet. No one was to approach her. Valerius, for all his arrogance, paled. He could not meet the king's gaze. "Your Majesty, I was merely expressing my concern for your welfare." "Your concern is noted and dismissed," Foreign cut him off. "Her welfare is my welfare. Her health is the health of this kingdom. An insult to her is an insult to me. Do you understand?" "Yes, Alpha," Valerius choked out, the formal title a mark of complete capitulation. Foreign's gaze was glacial. "You will not speak to her again. You will not look at her again. You will forget she exists outside of my command. If I hear so much as a whisper of your displeasure, I will strip you of your titles and lands and send you to guard the frozen north for the rest of your miserable life." The threat hung in the air, absolute and final. Foreign then turned his blazing eyes to me. He took the final step and stood behind me, so close I could feel the furnace heat of his body. His large hand came to rest on the small of my back, a gesture of shocking possession and protection. It sent a jolt of fire straight through me. In front of the court's most powerful lord, he was publicly marking me as his. My wolf preened, even as my human side trembled. "She is with me," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through my bones. It was a statement of fact, a warning, a claim. Without another word, he guided me from the garden, his hand never leaving my back. We walked in silence through the corridors, a king and his pet healer, a living scandal. But for the first time since I'd arrived, I did not feel like a prisoner. I felt protected. That night, the atmosphere in his chamber was different. The air was still charged with the aftermath of his anger. He was pacing, a caged lion, the muscles in his back and shoulders coiling and uncoiling. The encounter with Valerius had stirred his wolf, and it was now prowling dangerously close to the surface. When he finally stopped and turned to me, his eyes were almost entirely gold. "Kneel," he commanded, his voice rougher than usual. I obeyed. my heart pounding as I settled onto the bearskin rug. He sat before me, holding out his arm. The curse seemed agitated, the black veins darker, more pronounced, as if feeding on his heightened emotion. I placed my hands on him, bracing myself. The connection was instantaneous and violent. The curse lunged at me, no longer tentative. It didn't just hiss in my mind, it roared. It flooded my senses with Kalen's hatred, with the sorcerer's dying agony and triumph. Then it changed tactics. It didn't show me Foreign's death. It showed me my own. I saw myself, drained and gray, collapsing beside the throne. I saw Foreign, healed and whole, looking down at my body with cold indifference before turning away. I saw Valerius smiling, ordering the guards to dispose of the husk. The vision was so real, so visceral, that a cry of pain was torn from my throat. An icy agony, sharp as a dagger, pierced through my spirit. It was the pain of being used, of being worthless, of being discarded. Isandra! Foreign's voice was a distant roar. The curse pressed its advantage, the icy pain intensifying, stealing my breath. This was too much. It was breaking me. I tried to pull away, but my hands felt fused to his skin. Black spots swarmed my vision. Suddenly the contact was broken. Foreign's hands were on my arms, ripping my hands from his skin. He hauled me forward, his face a mask of feral fury. "What did it do?" he growled, shaking me slightly, his grip iron. "What did you see?" I couldn't answer, only gasped for breath, tears of pain and fear streaming down my face. "Show me," he commanded, his eyes blazing. Then I saw it. On the back of my right hand, the one that had been closest to his wound, a thin black line appeared. It wasn't a fleeting phantom this time. It was real, a dark, ugly thread under my skin, pulsing with a faint, sick violet light. It was a tendril of the curse, a root taking hold in new soil. Foreign saw it too. A guttural, inhuman snarl ripped from his throat. It was the most terrifying sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of an alpha witnessing his mate being wounded. All pretense of king and healer, of master and tool, was incinerated in that moment. There was only the wolf, raw and enraged. He pulled my hand to his face, his eyes fixated on the horrifying mark. The king who had fought the bond, who had held himself back, who had treated me as a possession, was gone. In his place was something primal and absolute. Before I could even process what was happening, he lowered his head and pressed his mouth to the mark on my hand. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a desperate, possessive act of instinct. His lips hot and firm against my cold skin. I felt a jolt, a current of pure alpha power, flow from him into me. He was trying to push the darkness out, to reclaim what it had tainted. He was trying to mark his territory over the curse's claim. His teeth grazed my skin, and a low possessive growl vibrated from his chest, a sound that resonated deep in my soul. It was a declaration spoken not in words, but in the ancient language of the wolf, mine. The touch of his mouth on my skin was a brand of lightning and fire. It wasn't a kiss of romance. It was a desperate, primal act of ownership, an alpha's attempt to physically drive out a rival scent. His power, raw and untamed, flooded the point of contact, warring with the icy tendril of the curse. I felt a searing pain, followed by a wave of warmth that spread from his lips through my hand, chasing the unnatural cold. Under his mouth, the black line flickered violently, like a dying ember, and then retreated, vanishing back into the metaphysical ether from which it had come. He pulled back, his breath coming in harsh, ragged bursts. His golden eyes, wild with a tempest of fury and fear, were locked on my hand. He held it in both of his, turning it over, examining it as if expecting the mark to reappear. My skin was clear, but the phantom sensation of his lips, of his teeth grazing my skin, lingered like a scorching brand. "It touched you? Oh," he growled, the words torn from his throat. "It marked you." I could only nod, my own voice lost in the shock of it all. The violence of his reaction had shaken me to my core. The king who had kept me at a careful, calculated distance was gone. This was the wolf, stripped of all artifice, reacting with pure, possessive instinct. He saw the curse not as an affliction upon his own body, but as an attack on what belonged to him. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. He looked up from my hand, his gaze meeting mine. The fury in his eyes was still there, but now it was layered with something else, something deeper and more complex. It was a dawning, horrified understanding. In his quest for a cure, he had exposed me to the very poison he was trying to escape. He had made me a target. "This changes nothing," he said, but his voice lacked its usual iron conviction. It was the growl of a man trying to convince himself. "The healing must continue." "It's getting stronger, Foreign," I whispered, using his name for the first time without a title. It felt both forbidden and strangely right on my tongue. "It's learning. It's adapting to me. Tonight, it showed me you, healed, leaving me to die." His hands tightened on mine, his knuckles white, a muscle feathered in his jaw. "It feeds on fear. It is a lie." "Is it?" I challenged, finding a sliver of courage in the wreckage of my emotions. "You told me yourself, I belong to you. I am your tool to be used. What happens when the tool is broken?" A shadow passed over his face, a flicker of guilt, of conflict. He released my hand and stood up, turning his back to me to pace before the fire. The flames cast his powerful, scarred form in a dramatic dance of light and shadow. He was a king caught in a trap of his own making. He needed me, but his pride, his years of self-imposed isolation, refused to let him admit the bond that my wolf, and now his, screamed was between us. "You will not break," he finally said, his back still to me. "I will not allow it." He turned, his face set like stone, the king's mask firmly back in place, but I could see the cracks. The wolf was still there, just beneath the surface, watching me with hungry golden eyes. "Master Alien will double your protective wards. You will not leave these chambers again for any reason. Valerius has shown his hand. There are others in my court who feel the same. They see you as a threat, a witch. Your only safety is here, with me." A gilded cage had just become a sealed vault. He was protecting me, yes, but he was also isolating me completely, ensuring my entire world consisted of nothing but him and his wound. He strode to a large, iron-bound chest at the foot of his bed and lifted the heavy lid. He rummaged inside for a moment before withdrawing something that gleamed in the firelight. He came back to me, uncurling his fingers to reveal a small, intricately carved dagger in a sheath of worn leather. The hilt was polished silver, shaped like a howling wolf's head, and the pommel was set with a single deep blue sapphire. "This is a silencer," he said, his voice low and serious. "Forged from lunar-blessed silver. It is a blade meant for assassins and sorcerers. It disrupts magic. If you ever feel the curse's touch on your skin again, press the hilt against the mark. The silver will repel it." He pressed the dagger into my hand. It was cold and surprisingly heavy, thrumming with a faint latent energy. It was a weapon, an artifact of immense power and value, and he was giving it to me. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. His gaze was intense. "Because no one attacks what is mine and goes unpunished. Not a spiteful lord, and not the ghost of a dead sorcerer." His declaration hung in the air, a possessive, dangerous vow. He was claiming me again, but this time, it was not as a healer or a tool. It was as a territory to be defended. My heart hammered against my ribs, a confusing mix of fear at his intensity and a soaring, treacherous hope. He might not say the word, but his every action, every feral instinct, screamed mate. The next week was a strange and tense intimacy. I was confined to my chambers, and his, a prisoner of his protection. Every night we performed the same ritual. I would kneel before him, and he would offer his arm. The battle was always draining, always terrifying. The curse was insidious, clever, It no longer tried to attack me with brute force. Instead, it whispered. It showed me tantalizing visions of a life I could have had. A simple omega, mated to a kind beta, with children and a place in a warm, welcoming pack. It showed me my parents, who had died years ago, their faces filled with disappointment at what I had become. It used my deepest loneliness against me, trying to make me despair, to make me give up. But I had the silencer. The moment the visions became too much, the moment I felt that icy dread seeping into my soul, I would press the silver hilt against my arm or my temple. The blessed metal would send a clean, cold shock through me, severing the curse's connection, silencing its lies. And Foreign was always there. He watched me with an unnerving focus during the healings, his golden eyes tracking every flicker of emotion on my face. The instant he saw me falter, his hand would cover mine, his own strength pouring into me, a silent, resolute support. During the days, a strange sort of domesticity settled over us. He would spend hours at the great oak table in his chambers, poring over maps and dispatches from the kingdom's borders. I would sit by the fire with my ancient books, searching for any scrap of lore that might help us. The silence between us was not empty, but filled with a heavy, unspoken awareness. Sometimes, I would look up and find him watching me, his expression unreadable. My wolf would stir, a hopeful, happy tremor running through me. He would see me watching, and his gaze would immediately snap back to his papers, the king's mask firmly in place. One afternoon, a dispatch arrived that made his face darken. He read the scroll, his jaw tightening until the muscles stood out in sharp relief. "What is it?" I asked softly. He looked up, his stormy eyes troubled. "More attacks along the southern border. Cattle slaughtered, a village watchman found dead, signs of wolves, but not our own, rogues, or worse." "Enemies from the southern packs?" I asked, recalling the words he'd thrown at me the first night. He nodded, crushing the scroll in his fist. "Perhaps, or perhaps it is simply the scent of a weakened alpha on the wind. They circle like vultures, waiting for the lion to fall." His gaze fell to his cursed arm, a look of profound self-loathing on his face. This wound was not just a personal agony, it was a threat to his entire kingdom. That night, the healing was different. He was distracted, his anger and frustration making the curse more volatile. It pulsed with a malevolent energy feeding on his turmoil. I placed my hands on him and pushed my light into the darkness, but it was like trying to hold back a tsunami. The curse surged, not at me this time, but at him. I felt a wave of pure despair wash over him from the bond. A vision flooded my mind, but it was his, not mine. He was on the battlefield at Blackwater Pass again, but this time he saw his men falling around him, their faces accusing. He saw his kingdom in flames, his people enslaved, all because he was too weak to protect them. The curse was using his deepest fear, his fear of failure as a king, to break his spirit. A strangled cry of anguish escaped his lips. His body began to tremble, his control shattering under the force of the psychic assault. "Foreign!" I cried out, terrified. The curse was going to kill him, to make him give up from the inside. My instincts took over. I couldn't fight the curse's strength, so I had to get past it. I dropped my hands from his arm, and before I could second-guess the insane impulse, I threw my arms around his neck. Pressing my body against his, I buried my face in the crook of his neck, my lips brushing his skin. I didn't try to push my healing light. I pushed my emotion. I pushed the fierce, protective loyalty of my wolf, the terrified hope of my human heart, and all the desperate, unspoken feelings that had been growing in the space between us. I flooded the bond not with power, but with pure, unadulterated feeling. "I am here," I screamed at him in my mind. "You are not alone! Don't you dare leave me!" His body went rigid. The tremors stopped. I felt a great shuddering breath rack his frame. Slowly, hesitantly, his uninjured arm came up and wrapped around my waist, pulling me tighter against his bare chest. His other hand came to rest on the back of my head, his fingers tangling in my hair. He held me, anchoring himself to me, his face buried in my shoulder. The oppressive weight of the curse receded, retreating from the raw, undeniable power of the mate bond. For the first time, it had encountered a force greater than its own hatred. It had encountered our connection, finally acknowledged. We stayed like that for a long time, kneeling on the rug in the firelight, wrapped in an embrace that was both a surrender and a declaration of war. His heart hammered against my chest, a frantic rhythm that slowly began to steady, matching my own. The scent of him, pine and smoke and pure alpha, filled my senses, a dizzying, intoxicating perfume. Finally, he stirred, his hand stroking my hair. He pulled back just enough to look at me. His eyes, now a clear, molten gold, were filled with a raw, unguarded emotion that stole my breath. The king was gone. The warrior was gone. There was only the man, his soul laid bare. "Isandra," he breathed, his voice thick and rough. My name on his lips was a prayer. He lifted a hand, his calloused thumb gently tracing the line of my jaw, his touch sending a cascade of shivers down my spine. His gaze dropped to my mouth. The air crackled, the space between us shrinking until it was non-existent. This was it, the moment the world had been holding its breath for. He leaned in, slow, deliberate, giving me every chance to pull away. I couldn't. I leaned in to meet him. Just as his lips were about to touch mine, a frantic, desperate pounding echoed from the great oaken door of his chambers. "Your Majesty, Alpha King, there's been a breach. The Silencer's blood, it's been spilled in the lower halls." The voice was one of the Crimson Guard, panicked and strained. Foreign froze, his eyes widening in shock and fury. The moment shattered. He pulled away from me, the spell broken, his face instantly hardening back into the mask of the king. He looked from me to the door, his jaw set. "The Silencer's blood?" I whispered, confused. "What does that mean?" He looked at me, and a new, terrible fear entered his eyes. A fear not for himself, but for me. "The Silencers are an ancient order of assassins," he said, his voice grim. "The ones my dagger was forged to fight against. And they swore an oath, sealed in blood, to hunt down and destroy anyone who bears the magic of Kalen the Shadow Sorcerer." My blood ran cold as I stared at the silencer dagger he had given me, now lying on the table beside my books. "They aren't here for me," he said, his golden eyes filled with a dawning horror. "They're here for you." The world narrowed to the space between our lips, a breath of air charged with years of loneliness and a few weeks of impossible hope. Then the pounding on the door shattered it all, the guard's panicked words a spray of ice water on a budding flame. Foreign ripped himself away from me, the sudden loss of his heat, a physical blow. In the space of a heartbeat, the vulnerable male who had almost surrendered to the bond was gone, replaced by the Alpha King, a creature of pure, cold fury. "What did you say, he roared, his voice shaking the very foundations of the room. "Assassins, my king, in the west corridor. They bear the mark of the Silencers. Captain Vorlog is holding them, but they drew blood." Foreign's head snapped toward me, his golden eyes wide with a horror so profound it dwarfed any pain the curse had ever caused him. "They're here for you." His unspoken words screamed in the space between us. He moved with the explosive speed of a thunderclap. He was across the room in 2 strides, throwing on a dark tunic, his movements economical and deadly. He strapped a brace to his cursed forearm, and then his sword belt. The familiar rasp of leather and steel, the sound of impending death. I stood frozen, my hand still tingling where he had almost kissed it, the silencer dagger he'd given me feeling like a lead weight in my palm. "Bar this door," he commanded, his voice a low, lethal growl as he strode back to me. He grabbed my shoulders, his grip firm, forcing my terrified gaze to meet his. "You will not open it. You will not make a sound. You will not let anyone in unless you hear my voice. And my voice alone. Do you understand me, Isandra?" I nodded, unable to form words. The sheer violent protectiveness rolling off him in waves was suffocating. It was a storm, and I was in the eye of it. He looked at me for one more fraction of a second. 1,000 unspoken promises and fears passing between us in that glance. Then he was gone, the heavy oak door booming shut behind him. The sound of the great iron bar sliding into place. On his side, echoing like a death knell, I was alone. The vast chamber, which had felt so intimate moments before, was now a cavernous, terrifying prison. I could hear the distant sounds of battle, shouts, the brutal percussive clang of steel on steel, and a deep, rumbling growl that could only have come from Foran's own throat. My bond with him, now raw and exposed, was a conduit for his rage. I could feel the fury thrumming through my own veins, a terrifying echo of his battle lust. I clutched the silencer dagger, its silver hilt cold against my sweating palm. This was my fault. The assassins were here for me. The healing, the connection I had with his curse, had painted a target on my back. I was not a cure. I was a contagion, a weakness in his armor that his enemies had found and were now trying to exploit. Kaelin's curse was not just a festering wound. It was a beacon, and it had called his hunters to the king's own hearth. Pacing the room like a caged animal, my bare feet silent on the cold stone, I listened. The sounds of fighting were sporadic but vicious. Every clash of swords sent a fresh spike of terror through me. My wolf was a frantic, whining presence in my mind, desperate to go to him, to fight by his side, to offer her own throat in his defense. It was a suicidal, useless instinct. But it was so powerful I had to physically restrain myself from running to the door and screaming his name. Then the sound stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise of battle. It was absolute, profound, and terrifying. Was he hurt? Was he? My mind refused to complete the thought. I stood in the middle of the room, my knuckles white on the hilt of the dagger, straining my ears, my every nerve ending screaming into the void. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The fire in the hearth crackled, the sound unnaturally loud in the crushing stillness. Then I heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate. They stopped outside the door. My heart leaped into my throat. Isandra! His voice. It was rough, strained, but it was his. I scrambled to the door, my hands fumbling with the heavy bar on my side. It took all my strength to lift it. The door swung inward, and he was there, filling the frame, a terrifying and beautiful vision of a victorious warrior king. He was splattered with blood. Dark, viscous flecks coated his tunic, his arms, and a long, vicious smear ran down the side of his face. His eyes were blazing gold, the fire of his wolf still burning bright. The air around him was thick with the metallic scent of blood and the ozone crackle of spent rage. He scanned the room, his gaze first ensuring it was empty, then landing on me. He took in my wide, terrified eyes, my white-knuckled grip on the dagger. "It's over," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You are safe." He stepped inside, and before I could react, he was closing the distance between us. His hands, surprisingly gentle for a man who had just dealt death, came up to cup my face. His thumbs brushed away the tears I hadn't even realized were falling. He searched my face, his eyes cataloging every detail, assuring himself that I was truly unharmed. "Did they hurt you?" he murmured, his voice laced with a dangerous undercurrent. "Did they touch you?" "No," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Foran, the blood is not my own," he finished grimly. "They were skilled, but they were not prepared for an angry alpha." The sheer understatement sent a shiver down my spine. I could only imagine the fury he had unleashed on the men who had dared to threaten me in his own home. A commotion in the hallway drew his attention. He didn't release me, but turned his head, his body still a formidable shield in front of mine. Captain Vorlog, the head of his Crimson Guard, appeared in the doorway. His face was grim, his own armor dented and bloodied. But he was not alone. Two of his guards were hauling a figure between them. A man in the fine robes of a courtier, now torn and dirtied. His silver hair was disheveled, and a bruise was already purpling on his cheek. It was Lord Valerius. "We found him by the East Postern Gate," Captain Vorlog reported, his voice tight with disgust. "He used his seal to grant the assassins passage. He led them through the old servants' tunnels himself." Foran's entire body went rigid. The hands holding my face tightened, not with pain, but with a pressure that was almost unbearable. He had faced assassins, shadow sorcerers, and rival packs, but this, betrayal from within, from the man who had advised him for years, was a deeper wound. He released me and turned slowly to face his former advisor. The temperature in the room plummeted. The rage from the battle, which had begun to subside, came roaring back. But this time it was a cold, silent, focused fury that was infinitely more terrifying. Valerius, held between the two guards, spat a wad of blood onto the polished floor. He lifted his head, and his eyes, filled with a fanatic's fire, met Foran's. "I did it for the kingdom," he snarled, his voice a ragged mess of hate and righteousness. "For you, can you not see what she has done? That Omega witch has poisoned your mind. She leeches your strength, ensnares you with her dark magic. I brought the silencers here to cleanse you, to cut out the rot before it consumed you completely. I acted to save you from her." Every word was a nail in his own coffin. The assembled guards in the hall shifted, their horror and disgust palpable. To conspire with assassins against anyone under the king's protection was treason of the highest order. Foran did not move. He simply watched Valerius, his face an unreadable mask of stone. The silence stretched, thick and heavy with impending doom. I could feel the gazes of the guards on me, a mixture of awe, fear, and a new, grudging respect. I was no longer just the Omega healer. I was the one the king had defended with blood, the one a High Lord had committed treason to destroy. Finally, Foran spoke, his voice quiet, calm, and utterly devoid of mercy. "You speak of poison, Valerius. You, who would invite assassins into my home. You speak of saving me. You, who tried to orchestrate the murder of the one person keeping this curse at bay." He took a slow, deliberate step toward me. The guards in the hall parted before him like the sea. He reached me and, in a move that made the entire corridor gasp, he curled his hand around the back of my neck and drew me to his side. He tucked me against his body, a public, undeniable act of possession. "This woman," he said, his voice ringing with absolute authority, every word a hammer blow against the old order, "is not a witch. She is not a parasite. She is under my direct and absolute protection." He looked down at me then, his golden eyes blazing with an intensity that burned straight to my soul. In front of his crimson guard, in front of his condemned traitor, he was about to make a statement that could never be unmade. He lowered his head, his nose brushing against the sensitive skin below my ear, inhaling my scent. I felt the rumble start in his chest, a low, possessive growl. Then I felt the sharp pressure of his teeth against my neck. Not enough to break the skin, but a powerful, definitive clay mark over my bonding gland. It was a brand of ownership, a warning to the entire world. A collective, sharp intake of breath came from the guards. Valerius's eyes widened in stunned, horrified disbelief. An Alpha King did not claim an Omega. It was unthinkable. It shattered centuries of tradition. Foran lifted his head, his gaze returning to Valerius, his hand never leaving my neck. The gold in his eyes was the color of a supernova, brilliant and deadly. "For the crime of high treason against the crown," Foran declared, his voice echoing in the sudden tomb-like silence, "and for threatening the life of my fated mate." Mate. He said the word out loud, the word he had fought, the word I had despaired of ever hearing. It shot through me, a bolt of pure, unadulterated shock and joy, so powerful my knees went weak. Foran's voice dropped to a lethal whisper, sealing the traitor's fate and our own. "I, Foran Dramos, sentence you to death. The execution will be at dawn, and I will carry it out myself." The word hung in the air, heavier than a crown, brighter than a naked flame. Mate. It was a proclamation, a verdict, and a vow all at once. The world tilted on its axis. The guards in the hallway were statues of shocked granite. their faces a mixture of disbelief and a dawning, profound awe. Valerius's face crumpled, the fanatical righteousness draining away to be replaced by the ashen, slack-jawed horror of a man who has not only failed, but has fundamentally misunderstood the entire game. He had seen a witch to be purged. He had been blind to a Luna in the making. Foreign's hand was a warm, possessive weight on my neck, his thumb stroking the spot where his teeth had pressed, a silent reaffirmation of his claim. The bond between us, once a hesitant, humming thread, now blazed like a forest fire, a torrent of his fierce protectiveness, his grim satisfaction, and a deep, soul-shaking relief pouring into me. He had not just accepted the bond, he had declared it as law. "Take him to the dungeons," Foreign commanded, his voice cold iron. He did not look at Valerius again, dismissing the traitor from his existence. Captain Vorlog and his men bowed their heads in unison, a gesture of renewed absolute loyalty, and dragged the now limp form of the former Lord Advisor away. The heavy rhythmic footsteps of the guards receded, leaving us in a profound ringing silence. Foreign turned me to face him, his hands moving from my neck to my shoulders. He searched my face, his golden eyes still turbulent but now holding a new light, the soft, steady glow of a man who has finally come home. The Alpha King had passed sentence, but the male standing before me was seeking my verdict. "Isandra," he began, his voice rough with an emotion I couldn't name. I didn't let him finish. I rose on my toes and did what I had wanted to do since the first moment I touched him. I pressed my mouth to his. It was not a tentative, questioning kiss. It was a collision, a desperate, mutual claiming. All the fear, the pain, the uncertainty of the past weeks poured into it. His lips were firm, tasting of blood and victory and him. For a split second, he was still, shocked by my boldness. Then, with a low groan that came from the very depths of his soul, he kissed me back. His arms wrapped around me, one around my waist, the other cradling the back of my head, pulling me so tightly against him that I could feel the frantic, heavy beat of his heart against my own. The world dissolved. There was no court, no curse, no assassins. There was only this. His strength surrounding me, his taste on my tongue, the overwhelming, intoxicating rightness of it all. This was what my wolf had known from the start. This was destiny. He broke the kiss only when the need for air became unbearable. We rested our foreheads together, both of us breathing heavily, the air thick with unspoken words. His scent, pine and winter, and the clean scent of his wolf, was a heady perfume that filled my senses. "I was a fool," he breathed, his voice ragged. "Blind and stubborn. I have fought this since the moment you touched me. I told myself it was the curse, a trick of the magic. I told myself an Alpha King should not be bound to a lowly Omega," I finished for him, my voice a soft murmur against his lips. "Should not be worthy of a mate so strong," he corrected, his voice fierce with conviction. He pulled back just enough to look into my eyes. "You have faced my moods, my court scorn, and the darkness of this curse with a courage I have not seen in my hardened warriors. You are no lowly Omega, Isandra. You are the other half of my soul. You are my queen." Tears welled in my eyes, blurring his beautiful, fierce face. My queen. He was rewriting the laws of our world for me, for us. He gently took my hand, the one that had borne the fleeting mark of the curse, and brought it to his lips. He pressed a soft, reverent kiss to the back of it, a stark contrast to the feral claim he had made on my neck. "Forgive me," he murmured against my skin, "for my pride, for my fear, for ever making you feel like a tool to be used." "There is nothing to forgive," I whispered, my free hand coming up to trace the smear of blood on his cheek. "You were drowning, and you didn't want to pull me down with you." A flicker of the old pain crossed his features. "And yet I have. The silencers. They came for you because the curse in me has tainted you. Valerius saw you as a threat for the same reason. By healing me, by binding yourself to me, you have painted a target on your back for every enemy I have ever made." Then they will have to face us together, I said, my voice filled with a strength I never knew I possessed. I looked from his worried eyes to the cursed arm he still held stiffly at his side. And we are going to end this, not just hold it back. End it. A new resolve settled over us, solid and unbreakable. We were no longer a king and his healer. We were a mated pair, facing our common enemy. We did not sleep. Dawn and the execution of Valerius was only a few hours away. Foreign shed his bloodied tunic and armor, washing the grime of battle from his skin in a basin of cool water. I watched him, the play of muscles across his scarred back, the way the curse's black veins seemed to writhe in the flickering firelight, a constant, ugly reminder of the battle still to come. He came to me by the fire, his chest bare, and knelt before me on the bearskin rug. "One more time," he said, his voice quiet but resolute. "But this time, it will be different." "How?" I asked, my heart beginning to hammer. "Before we were separate. I was the king, you were the healer. I resisted the bond. I fought you, fought us at every turn. My resistance gave the curse a fissure to hide in, a weakness to exploit. No more." He took both my hands in his. "We are one now, mated. My strength is yours and yours is mine. Do not just push your light at it. Let me pull it from you. Let me share the burden. We will face it together as one soul in two bodies." It was a terrifying, exhilarating idea. To open myself up to him that completely, to let him draw on my life force willingly, was an act of ultimate trust. But looking into his golden eyes, I felt no fear, only certainty. I nodded. He held out his arm. I placed my hands on him, but this time, I did not brace for an attack. I simply opened my heart, my mind, my spirit. I let down all my walls and invited him in. The connection slammed into place, but it was not the violent collision of before. It was a merging, a seamless flow of energy and intent. I felt him, his pain, yes, but also his strength, his will of iron, his deep love for his kingdom, and his fierce, burning love for me. And he felt me, my fear, my hope, my loneliness, my unshakable loyalty to him. The curse shrieked, caught between us. It was no longer fighting a single point of light, but a conflagration, a blazing sun of our combined spirits. It tried to show me visions of being abandoned, but they dissolved against the reality of his arms holding me. It tried to flood him with despair, but it was drowned out by the fierce joy of our bond finally acknowledged. Kaelin, the name echoed in our shared mind space, a scream of pure hatred from the dying sorcerer. I saw him again, through Foreign's memory, his face contorted in a triumphant rictus as he spoke the final words of his curse. But this time, I was not a spectator. I was there, beside Foreign, our spirits entwined. His magic is a parasite, I thought, the knowledge from the old book suddenly crystal clear. It needs a host. It feeds on alpha life force. And your touch starves it, Foreign's thoughts answered mine, a seamless conversation within our souls. But it has left a seed of itself, a sliver of its darkness in you. That was its fatal mistake. Together we focused on that single point of connection, that faint taint the curse had left within me. It was a bridge, a weakness. We didn't attack the main body of the curse in Foreign's arm. We attacked its anchor. "It thought to poison you," Foreign's spirit growled, a wave of protective fury flowing through us. But it only gave us the key. We poured our combined will, our light, our love, through that bridge, not pushing the curse out of him, but pulling it toward the tiny fragment it had lodged in me. It was like calling to a splinter of a greater whole. Confused, drawn by the echo of its own magic, the curse surged. I felt a terrifying evil wave of darkness flood toward me, but it wasn't entering my body. It was entering the metaphysical space between us, the crucible of our bond. And there, caught between the Alpha King and his mate, exposed to the pure, untainted light of our united souls, the curse had nowhere to hide. It combusted, a silent scream of pure agony, not from us, but from the curse itself, echoed in my mind. On Foreign's arm, the black veins flared with a violent, blinding violet light. The unhealed wound, the source of it all, sizzled as if touched by a white-hot poker. I felt a searing pain in my own soul, a lancing heat as the fragment within me was incinerated. Foreign threw his head back, a roar of pain and effort and triumph tearing from his throat, a sound that was both wolf and man. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. On his arm, the angry black veins faded, turning to gray, then silver, then disappearing completely into his skin, leaving behind only the faint, silvery traceries of old scars. The wound, the festering, unhealable wound that had plagued him for years, began to close. We watched, breathless, as new skin, clean and healthy, knitted itself together, leaving a fresh pink scar in its place. The oppressive, cloying scent of dark magic and decay that had clung to him for years was gone, replaced by the pure, clean scent of being and winter. The weariness in his eyes, the deep-etched lines of constant pain on his face, began to soften. I swayed, the effort and the sudden severing of the dark connection leaving me dizzy and utterly drained. He caught me, pulling me against his chest. I laid my head against his heart, hearing its strong, steady, unburdened rhythm. "It's gone," I whispered, my voice filled with awe. "We are whole," he corrected, his voice thick with emotion. He held me tightly, burying his face in my hair, his whole body trembling with the aftershocks of the battle. The war was over. The first rays of dawn were painting the sky in shades of rose and gold when Foreign finally stood. He was no longer the cursed king. He was whole, powerful, and utterly magnificent. He donned a simple dark tunic, strapped on his sword, and turned to me. "It is time," he said, his voice grim. He extended his hand. I took it without hesitation. Together, we walked from the chamber, not as king and healer, but as a mated pair, an alpha and his Luna, to face the new day and deliver the final, brutal justice that had been earned in the darkness. 1 year later, the obsidian throne felt different. The stone was no longer cold and menacing, but a familiar, solid presence at my back. I sat not upon the throne itself, but on the cushioned seat placed beside it, a position that had not existed in the Drymos dynasty for over a century. From this vantage point, I watched Foreign dispense the morning's justice. He was no longer the haunted, pain-etched king I had first met. The curse was gone, but its memory had left a new depth in his eyes, a wisdom forged in suffering. He was a better king for it, a more compassionate alpha. He listened to a border dispute between two minor lords, his expression thoughtful, his judgment swift and fair. The court, once a pit of vipers whispering about my supposed witchcraft, was now a sea of respectfully bowed heads. They had seen the truth. They had seen their king, whole and revitalized. They had seen him place a simple, elegant circlet of silver and moonstone, the mark of a Luna, upon my head, in a public ceremony that had stunned the kingdom. They had seen an Omega rise to become their queen, not through birth or conquest, but through a bond that had saved them all. They did not whisper anymore. They revered. When the morning's court was concluded, Foreign stood, and the entire hall rose with him. He turned to me, a soft smile touching his lips, a smile that was meant only for me. He offered his arm, not the one that bore the fresh, clean scar of a healed wound, but the other. I took it, and together we descended the dais, the lords and ladies of the court parting before us. We were a unit, a matched pair, and the entire kingdom knew it. We did not head for the royal chambers, but for the gardens. We walked the same path where Valerius had threatened me, but the memory held no fear. It was just a ghost of a past that no longer had any power over me. The sun was warm on our skin, and the scent of blossoms filled the air. Foreign led me to a stone bench beneath a weeping willow, the same spot where I had once trembled under his advisor's scorn. He sat beside me, taking my hands in his. His were large and calloused, a warrior's hands, but his touch was infinitely gentle. "A year ago," he said, his voice a low, soft rumble, I was a man waiting for death on a throne. And I was a girl hiding in the shadows, I added quietly, looking down at our joined hands. My own, once the hands of a forgotten Omega, were now adorned with a simple silver ring bearing the Dremos wolf crest, the hands of a queen. You were never hiding, Isandra, he said, his gaze intense. You were waiting. The moon goddess hid her greatest treasure in the last place anyone would think to look. He lifted my hand and pressed a kiss to my knuckles. Do you ever miss it, the quiet life? I thought for a moment of the simple anonymous existence I had once led, the communal meals, the lack of responsibility, the freedom to be invisible. Sometimes, I admitted honestly, but I would not trade this for anything. The quiet was safe, but it was also lonely. My heart was quiet, too. Now, I placed my free hand over his heart, feeling its steady, powerful rhythm. Now it sings the same song as yours. A look of such profound love crossed his face that it stole my breath. This was the true magic, more powerful than any curse or healing light. It was the quiet, unbreakable bond of two souls who had found their other half in the dark. The scouts returned from the southern border this morning, he said, changing the subject, but the warmth in his eyes remained. The rogue attacks have stopped. The packs that were testing our borders have retreated. They can scent a strong mated alpha from 100 leagues away. They know the time for circling is over. The kingdom was secure. The last lingering threat born of his weakness had vanished with the curse. And the silencers? I asked, the name still sending a faint shiver down my spine. Gone to shadow, he said grimly. They are assassins, not soldiers. They failed. Their contract was with Valerius, and he is no longer able to pay. He didn't need to say more. I had not attended the execution, but I had felt Foran's grim resolve through the bond, a king carrying out a painful but necessary duty to cleanse his court of its deepest poison. Their order hunts those tainted by Kaelin's magic. Since that taint is gone from both of us, they have no reason to return. All the threads were tied, all the enemies vanquished, all the wounds healed. Foran reached into his tunic and pulled out something small. He uncurled his fingers to reveal the smooth river stone Master Elian had given me, the one with the faint silver warding rune. I had left it on my dressing table that morning. Elian sends his regards, Pad, Foran said with a soft smile. He told me to give you this. He said that while you may no longer need it for protection, every queen needs a reminder of the strength she found when she was at her most vulnerable. I took the stone, its familiar weight a comfort in my palm. It represented the beginning of my journey, the moment I had chosen to step out of the shadows and face a king's wrath. Foran's gaze softened, his thumb stroking the back of my hand. There is one last thing, he said, a hint of nervousness in his voice that was so unlike him it made me smile. A king must secure his succession. The kingdom needs an heir. My heart gave a little flutter. We had spoken of it in quiet moments in the dead of night, but always as a distant future hope. The curse is gone, Isandra, he continued, his voice thick with emotion. It can no longer poison my bloodline. There is nothing left to fear. He leaned in, his forehead resting against mine, our breaths mingling in the warm afternoon air. I want to build a life with you, my mate, my Luna. I want to see this garden filled with the sound of our children's laughter. Tears of pure joy welled in my eyes. I thought back to the broken man on the throne, the lonely Omega in the crowd, and the impossible spark that had leaped between us. It had not been a spark of healing, but the first flicker of a fire that had burned away a curse, reforged a kingdom, and united two souls. Yes, I whispered, the single word holding all the love in my heart. Yes, my king. He kissed me then, a slow, deep kiss filled with promises of a shared future, of a new dynasty, of a love that had been written in the stars and sealed under the watchful eye of the moon. The scars of our past were still there, on his arm and in our memories, but they were no longer wounds. They were proof that we had survived, that we had fought the darkness together, and that we had won. Our story was not one of a healer and her king, but of a wolf and his mate, who had found their way home to each other finally and forever.